Autumn is in full swing and different varieties of squash are abundant, so today I'm showing you my 3 favourite squash recipes. Starting with these fluffy and sweet pecan and squash pancakes for breakfast. Then for lunch, a fragrant Thai-inspired coconut and squash soup with crispy oyster mushrooms. And for dinner, we're making beautiful golden squash gnocchi with a creamy cauliflower sauce. So let's get cooking. For all these recipes, we'll be using roast squash, so before starting the pancakes, we're going to prepare a few. Cut the squash in half, remove the seeds, and then roast for 25 to 30 minutes until tender. The air fryer also works great as well for roasting the squash. Don't worry about cutting up the squash too small, as we'll be scooping the flesh out from the skin. You could also use canned pumpkin puree if you wanted to for these pancakes. I'm using a variety of different squash, including a red curry, a summer yellow squash, and a sweet dumpling, which is my favourite just because of the really cute name. Once all the squash are cut up, I'm just going to roast them with a little salt and oil. No pepper for now, as I'll be using some for the pancakes, and we of course don't want pepper in the pancakes.
Different squash have different moisture levels. For example, the yellow summer squash contains quite a lot, so for these recipes, you may need to adjust the dry ingredients depending on what squash you're using. I haven't roasted the squash for too long, as they can dry out if taken too far. The first step to creating the pancakes is to create a buttermilk by combining vinegar or lemon juice with a plant milk of your choice. You want to use a plant milk with some protein in it, such as almond, oat or soy milk, in order for it to curdle. You also want to use the full fat version of that milk. Then just scoop out the squash and mash it with a fork until pureed. I'm using some of the red curry as it has a lovely golden orange flesh. For these pancakes, we're making a quick pumpkin spice mix out of ground ginger, cinnamon, ground clove, allspice and nutmeg. We'll then add the pureed squash to the milk, followed by some vanilla essence and a touch of maple syrup. I'm also adding some olive oil, although I would add coconut oil, just I didn't have any. You could also use any other oil, or some melted butter would also work. Whisk together until well combined. Next we'll get the dry ingredients ready, starting with some plain flour and some buckwheat flour. I like to sieve them just to ensure there's no lumps and to add a little bit of extra air to the mix. Then add some baking powder and bicarbonate of soda, which will react with the vinegar or lemon juice to give the pancakes their lift. Next, a couple teaspoons of the pumpkin spice mix that we made. You can add more or less depending on how spicy you want them to be. Also a touch of salt, and then whisk everything together to combine. This is important for ensuring the raising agent is distributed well throughout the mix. Then pour in the golden squash mix into your dry ingredients and gently fold in until there are no streaks of flour. You don't want to overmix it though, or your pancakes will be tough. I'm also adding some toasted and chopped pecans for a little extra nuttiness and crunch. You could add any types of nuts, or even some dark chocolate chips would go really well in these pancakes. These pancakes freeze really well as they have quite a high moisture content, so they don't dry out too much. You can then defrost them and pop them in the toaster when you want to eat them. Heat up a medium frying pan with a touch of oil, and if you're feeling naughty, some vegan butter. Dollop in your pancake mix and cook for a couple minutes on each side. Once you start to see bubbles coming through around the edges of the pancake, then they're ready to flip, and the butter is going to give them a lovely golden crust. Serve up your pancakes with maple syrup, berries, and I've got this mix of sugar and ginger powder that works really well on them.
So my family absolutely demolished that stack of pancakes, and I totally forgot that I actually need to taste them. So I've just got one here which I quickly toasted and put some maple syrup on it. Oh. That is good. The spice mix makes them lovely and fragrant. You can really taste the ginger, the cinnamon. There's a slight spiciness from the allspice and the nutmeg. Super delicious. You also get a really nice little nuttiness from the pecan nuts. And that is that pancake gone in seconds. Lovely fluffy texture, really tasty, and you get the bonus nutrients from the squash. Definitely give this a go on the weekend if you're looking for a treat breakfast.
The next recipe is a warming bowl of Thai-inspired coconut and squash soup. We'll also make some crispy oyster mushrooms to garnish the soup, because all soups need a good garnish. Start by roughly chopping some shallots. It's all being blended together at the end, so you don't need to be too neat. I've then got a stick of lemongrass. Simply bash it with the handle of your knife, or if you want to be a bit safer, use a rolling pin or something similar. Then remove the tougher outer leaves and roughly chop the inside. Supermarkets now have lemongrass in paste form, which is great to have in the fridge when you're making something Thai inspired. In a medium saucepan, I'm going to heat up a tablespoon of oil over a medium heat. Once it's hot, we're going to add the coriander and cumin seeds. Followed by 2 lime leaves. These aren't always easy to find, so you can just add some lime zest, but they add a really nice zingy, fresh, limey flavour to the soup. Fry for a couple of minutes, and once sizzling, add the shallot and a couple cloves of garlic. I'm then adding some green chilli. I've got this paste that needed using, but you can use fresh if you like. Next I've got some galangal paste. It's a root vegetable just like ginger, but with a more piney, earthy aroma, and not quite as spicy as ginger. Then simply add all your roasted squash. Most squash you can use the skin, especially as we're blending it at the end. The only one I couldn't use was the yellow summer squash, as it was way too firm. Give it a stir to break down the squash, and then add your vegetable stock and coconut milk. Any plant milk would work well here, but coconut milk is more traditional in Thai cuisine. I'm also adding some turmeric powder to give it even more golden colour. Add a good grinding of black pepper. Squash is quite a sweet vegetable, so it can take a lot of pepper. And some soy sauce to season it. I always like to use a pepper grinder rather than stuff that's pre-ground, as it's much more spicy and flavoursome, and you get a free wrist workout using that pepper grinder. Simmer the soup for 10 to 15 minutes. It won't need too long as the squash is already cooked. We're just sort of bringing all the flavours together and cooking the garlic and shallots through. I'm going to finish the soup with some fresh lime juice and a few leaves of Thai basil. Thai basil is very similar to normal basil, it's just got a slightly more aniseed flavour, so if you can't find it then feel free to use some normal basil or even some coriander. Blend it up until perfectly smooth. You can also add more vegetable stock if you think it's a little too thick, and season it with salt and pepper if it needs it. You could make this a chunky soup if you wanted to, but you would need to cut the squash into bite-sized pieces and finely chop the garlic, shallots and other aromatics. We're now going to make the crispy oyster mushrooms that we'll use to garnish the soup. Tear the mushrooms into small strips. We're then going to coat them in a tablespoon of sesame oil. Sesame oil has a lovely fragrant, nutty flavour, so definitely don't miss out on that. Then in a small bowl we're going to combine desiccated coconut, arrowroot powder or corn flour, ground coriander, sesame seeds and some granulated garlic. Pour the dry mix onto the mushrooms and shake to coat. You can also use your hands to press the dry mix into the mushrooms. I haven't tried this with more common mushroom varieties. It should work, but they might not get as crispy and chewy as oyster mushrooms do. Once they're nicely coated, I'm going to air fry them for around 8 to 12 minutes at 180 degrees until beautifully golden and crispy. As well as being a great topping on soup, they're also a great snack. I could easily eat a big bowl of them with a dip like hummus or chili jam. If you're looking for more snack recipes, then check out this video after you've watched this one. Now we're going to serve up the soup with those crispy mushrooms, a few herbs, and you could also drizzle over some coconut milk if you wanted to.
So lovely. Really delicious. It's got a lovely warming, cozy feel to it, but then it also has the freshness from the galangal, the lemongrass, and the lime leaves. In my opinion, soups always need to have something crunchy on top, and those mushrooms add exactly that, plus some salty and savoury flavour. If you wanted to, you could just cook a big bowl of those crispy mushrooms and have them on the side, and then you can dip them into the soup. That would be really nice. Such a lovely soup. You could also use it as sort of like a curry sauce and put tofu, vegetables in it, and then just serve it over rice. Maybe just make it slightly thicker. So yeah, you can use it as a soup or a curry sauce.
Last but not least, we're going to make these delicious golden squash gnocchi, starting with the roasted squash, surprise surprise. We're going to mash it up with a fork until mostly smooth. Traditional gnocchi often has ricotta in it, so we're going to add some firm tofu as a replacement. Simply mash it into the squash. Then we'll add the dry ingredients, starting with the plain flour, then some nutritional yeast for that nutty cheesy flavour, some mixed Italian herb seasoning, or you can use some fresh herbs like rosemary, thyme or oregano. A grating of fresh nutmeg. This spice goes beautifully with the squash, so definitely don't skip out on this. A big pinch of salt, a little bit of turmeric for even more golden colour, and 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Mix with a wooden spoon or spatula until well combined, then gently knead for about a minute. Depending on how wet your squash is, different varieties contain more or less moisture, so you may need to add more flour, to make the dough not too sticky. It will be a little bit sticky, but you don't want it to be completely unworkable. Try not to add too much more flour or knead the dough too much, as it will make the gnocchi really tough and chewy. My favourite squash for making these gnocchi is the red curry, as it doesn't have too much moisture, meaning you don't need to add lots of flour. In this video I used a bit of a mix, and the summer squash does contain a lot of moisture, so I had to add some extra flour. Onto a floured worktop, we're going to cut the dough into 4 pieces and roll them into long sausages. Then cut the sausages into 2 to 3 centimetre pieces. It helps here to flour your knife as well. I like to sort of cut the gnocchi and then flick away so that the gnocchi rolls away through the flour. When you cook the gnocchi, they will expand a fair bit, so keep this in mind when cutting them. You can also roll the gnocchi over a fork to add these little ridges so that the sauce will cling onto. To cook the gnocchi, we'll bring a pan of salted water to the boil, then add your gnocchi in batches, cooking for around 2 to 3 minutes or until they start to float. Don't worry if your gnocchi are all different shapes and sizes. If anything, that's a good thing, as it means you haven't overworked them while trying to shape them into the perfect piece. If you're using the gnocchi right away, you can scoop them out straight into your sauce or into a frying pan. If you're not going to use the gnocchi straight away, then remove it into ice cold water, as this will stop the cooking process. You can then drain the gnocchi and toss it in a little bit of oil to stop it from sticking, and at this point you can freeze the gnocchi to use later. We'll be pan frying the gnocchi, so I'm just going to leave it on the tray with a little oil, and now we can make the cauliflower sauce. I'm using a whole cauliflower and I'm just going to remove the leaves, but I won't be throwing away, I'm going to be roasting them as they'll go nice and crispy in the air fryer. The rest of the cauliflower can be cut into small florets and air fried until golden and caramelized. I'm also going to add a few garlic cloves and sage leaves. Sage goes really well with squash, but also the nutmeg that we put in the gnocchi, and then the garlic will go lovely and caramelized, and that will be blended into the cauliflower sauce. I was actually pretty surprised that I could roast a whole cauliflower in the air fryer, and it worked really well. I did have to take the leaves out halfway through the cooking, as they cooked a bit quicker than the cauliflower florets. Once it's roasted, I'm going to use half for the cauliflower sauce, and then the other half will keep whole and have with the gnocchi. Add it to a blender with the garlic, a little bit of miso to season, the tahini, lemon juice. I'll then add some vegetable stock and plant milk and blend until smooth. I'm also going to make a quick lemony mustard dressing, which is simply going to be lemon juice, mustard, olive oil, and a touch of agave or maple syrup. Simply add to a squeezy bottle or jar and shake until emulsified. We'll now pan fry the gnocchi in a touch of oil and some vegan butter, and we'll cook it until it's beautifully golden and crispy all over. I'm also going to add some more black pepper, as the squash is quite sweet, so this is going to counteract that. You don't have to pan fry the gnocchi, you can just blanch it and add it into the cauliflower sauce, but I think it's worth it as it adds a lovely crispy edge and just a bit more flavour. Serve up your gnocchi by spooning that velvety smooth cauliflower puree onto a plate, followed by the gnocchi, then some of that roasted cauliflower leaves and florets, and then I've got some peas for a bit of freshness, and then that lemony mustard dressing.
I love gnocchi. It's definitely worth making your own gnocchi. Compared to shop bought, this is miles better. They're like little fluffy pillows of heaven. The lemony mustard dressing really helps cut through the creamy cauliflower and the gnocchi, and then you got a little burst of freshness from those peas, and it's just a really nice combination. You've also got the crispy roast cauliflower. Always keep your cauliflower leaves because they go really nice and crispy in the air fryer. This is a great one to make on the weekend, as the gnocchi does take a little bit of extra time, but it's definitely worth it, and you can also batch make it and freeze it. If you enjoyed today's video, then check out this one for more plant-based goodness. You won't be disappointed.